Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. And for most of those platforms, your question or comment will show up here in my chat room. The chat room is on the screen today because I do not have a guest today. And today, my subject is going to continue the general subject of divination that we've talked about to some extent this week. And we were talking about this in particular on Tuesday with Reverend Phoenix and Reverend Alyssa. And of course, yesterday, my guest was Chris Copeland, who now joins us on the second Tuesday of every month. Um, and what do I want to say about divination? I think the first thing I want to say, when on Tuesday we were talking about divination as part of daily life. Hello to Brian in the chat room. It's good to see you, Brian. Divination is a way that we communicate with spirit and/or our higher selves through the language of symbols. That allows, depending exactly on your definition of what is divination versus what is clairvoyance or oracular work. Hello to Kayleen in the chat room. It's good to see you. That allows spirit to communicate with us in ways that bypass our analytic brain, our thinking brain, um, and therefore help us to be able to accept it. One of the things I talk about with divination all the time is that when you're doing divination, you must suspend all judgment and simply bring it through. When you're doing clairvoyance and oracular work, you must suspend all judgment and simply bring it through. If it's the most outrageous thing in the world, you still bring it through. Now, after you're done, you can go back and analyze it to your heart's content, but you can't do it while you're doing it because you'll shut it down. Or worse, you'll warp it. You need to keep your mind out of the flow of that communication. Then you bring your mind back when you're done. One of the things about divination and oracular work, and ultimately I see these as all part of the same continuum, is that the messenger can always warp the message. And you have to bear this in mind when you're doing anything, well, I think really anything in life, that the observer is never truly separate from the observed, because you bring so many things to your experience of observation. And hello to Renee in the chat room. And it's entirely possible to greatly misconstrue something because of preconceived notions about it. And this is something that is part of being human. It never leaves us, but we can learn to set that part of ourselves aside. Um, and that's very important in any kind of psychic work. Um, for example, it's much easier for this reason to be able to read for a stranger that you have never met and about whose situations you have no knowledge than it is for someone that you know well. Because the person that you know well, you already have ideas about them, and you're going to have to keep those out. The person you've never met, there's nothing to fight against. Now, if you're good at reading, you have learned to do this as second nature. Um, it's not something that's going to normally require any sort of actual consideration because it is just a step you take. But you have to learn that. You have to practice that. It's like a poker face. There are some people who can control the look on their face no matter what is happening. And in most cases, they have learned how to do that, probably by facing a lot of traumatic experiences. With messaging, with divination and clairvoyance and oracular work, learning to keep our thought process out of the reception of those messages is a skill we learn. And it's very, very important. And hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room. If you want to do good clairvoyance or oracular work, you must learn how to do this. And you must also remember that sometimes you still can slip up. Therefore, whatever you bring through, you must always take it with a grain of salt. You must. Well, the way I like to put it is that if Spirit tells you to sell everything you own and go buy lottery tickets, don't do that. That is not an accurate message. Your thoughts and fears have interfered and warped that message somewhere, because Spirit would not tell you to do such a thing. On the other hand, if Spirit tells you to go buy a lottery ticket, that's a totally different thing. But you need to use practical common sense in applying the messages that you receive. Now, having said that, there are occasions when I have certainly received messages that were totally counter to anything I would have thought in the circumstance, that turned out to be absolutely accurate. I'm dealing with a situation with someone that I work with now, where everything that can be seen goes completely against what I'm getting in that situation, except every now and then that it's something hits so well that it's obvious that it's not just mishitting. And so I keep bringing it through, despite the fact that it's not always seeming to be confirmed. I had a situation where I had predicted in this situation I'm talking about that a certain person would be in a car accident. They would be fine, but they were going to be in a car accident on a certain day at a certain time. Well, that day came and it left, and nothing seemed to have happened. And my answer to that is, sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the message is warped, and you just have to accept that from time to time. And then about 3 days later, we found out that no, there had been exactly such a car accident at exactly such a time. It had just not been discussed publicly. And that was a wonderful confirmation, especially because, as predicted, there were no injuries. But sometimes that aspect of not bringing judgment to your messages is very, very important. Just saying, well, I think this is going to happen on a certain day at a certain time, I always find that challenging to do, because that's so specific. And yet on a number of occasions, I've had it hit exactly so. And I wouldn't say that it always does, however. But that brings us back to, you have to apply things with common sense. You have to look at your track record, and you have to not be foolish about it. Like I say, if Spirit tells you to sell everything you own and buy lottery tickets, that's foolish. You should not do that. If it tells you to buy a lottery ticket, well, that's a reasonable thing. It tells you to buy 10, that arguably is still a reasonable thing. But I suppose it's like the famous saying, if so-and-so tells you to jump off the cliff, would you? And generally speaking, if Spirit tells you to jump off the cliff, you probably should not. Unless there are very special circumstances. When you are working with divination and psychic matters, this is important to bear in mind. You want to bring through exactly what you receive, but you also want to have common sense in how you apply it. And this is true whether you're the psychic or whether you're a client getting a reading. You want to use your common sense, and you also want to go with what feels right for you. I don't very often go to psychics today for a variety of reasons. If I let you read for me, that is a high compliment. I don't do it very often, but when I was younger, I did. When I was learning this art, I went to many psychics both out of curiosity and also to see how other people did things. And I found that some of them hit immensely well, and others did not. Hello to Steve Taylor in the chat room. And I think this is actually only to be expected. And my feeling is that even the best psychic can have a bad day or a bad connection with an individual, and even the worst psychic can have a great day on occasion. Hello to Maria Law in the chat room. It's good to see you, Maria. Um, and even if you're working with someone who has a strong history of being right, if they tell you something that just doesn't seem right, you want to pay attention to that too. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. I would never tell you to treat a psychic message as if it were, for want of a better word for it, gospel. That you want to treat it as advice that you take into account based on track record and track record very importantly, and also common sense. Having said that, I've seen, like I say, amazing things. I gave a couple of examples. Another example I often give, my friend Judy many years ago was working with a psychic named Deandra, who was quite prominent in the Chicago area. And she had predicted, Deandra had predicted that Judy was going to have a grandchild at a particular, I don't think it was a specific day, but it was by a particular week, a particular month. And that must have been the second or third week in November, because we happened to be all at the same Thanksgiving meal. And Judy brought this up and said, you told me my granddaughter was going, or my daughter was going to be pregnant with a child by about a week ago. And that didn't happen to come to pass. And Deandra said, well, I guess I was wrong. And that is the ideal answer to make as a psychic. You can be wrong, and if it happens, you simply own it. As it happened in that case, the daughter announced that she was pregnant the following week, and so it was only the timing that was off. And I've always thought that was rather remarkable also. So if you get something, you always want to relay that message. But another thing about being a psychic is you want to relay the message in the most positive way. You do not want to set a person up for problems they don't need to have. An example that I think of in regard to that, I once worked with a very famous psychic. I will not mention her name because of the nature of the example, but she read for a pregnant woman and told her she was going to miscarry. The woman, of course, was very upset and went to several other psychics at the fair and told the story. And she got different answers from most of those people. But afterwards, we talked about this. And most of the other psychics felt this was not a message that should have been given that way. Because sometimes a client will make something happen simply because they're expecting it. And if you set them up for a disastrous happening, that really is not good. Instead, you want to give them the ways to avoid a disastrous happening if you can. If you have the feeling of a car accident, you want to encourage them to be very careful around that time, to make sure that they're staying safe, to be careful in their driving. And you can say there's the danger of this happening, but don't tell them it absolutely must, because as we were talking about the other day, when we deal with divination, it's showing us what can happen and giving us the ability to make changes. And this is important to remember. And yes, I will agree that some things can't always be changed because the soul simply needs them, but most things can be changed. So, as I was saying with the reading I had done earlier about the person getting in a car accident, had I been speaking to them directly, and I was not, I was speaking to one of their loved ones, but I would have told them that they really needed to be careful with any dangerous roadways that they were on. I don't think I would have bluntly said, you're likely to be in a car accident. I would have said you need to be careful that you're being safe in your driving, that you are taking necessary precautions, that you're not taking unnecessary risks. And if you are taking unnecessary risks, well, it may lead to something. Um, but there are ways to present things. And, um, one of the things that used to happen a lot when I worked psychic fairs is we would get someone who would come in with the question, well, when will I die? This is not a question that you really should, um, under most circumstances, even consider answering for someone. And one of the reasons is I don't really think that's a set time. I think we have many opportunities in our lives. And to tell someone you will absolutely die at a certain point is setting them up in bad ways. For one thing, it isn't necessarily true and can certainly be changed. And on the other hand, it may cause them to make choices that are not necessarily wise choices. Um, you know, a little over 2 years ago, I was in the hospital for a long period of time, and a lot of people were absolutely convinced that I was about to die. For better or worse, I knew that I was not. But a lot of people thought I was, and they made very foolish choices in some cases based on that thought, that did not lead them to where they really wanted to be or where they thought they were going. But they had the certainty this was going to happen, and it did not. Divination would have been a very good idea for people at that time. Um, I knew, partly from talking with Spirit and from the experience itself, that having survived the incident, I would be around for a while. Um, I did go ahead and make a number of changes, but I'm not anticipating death anytime in the near future at this point. When we bring through a message, we need to bear in mind that it can play out in different ways. I certainly could have died in that incident. I believe that in other timelines I probably did. But in this one, I certainly did not. And when you're reading for people, you want to remember that what you're really doing is you're advising them of how to make the best of their situations, and often how to change them, how to improve them, how to make situations better, not trying to condemn them to unavoidable circumstances. Um, and I think that as a reader, this is a very important point to stick to. Now, having said that, if you get the message, you must give it. I'm not suggesting that you don't. I'm just saying that you consider your wording. Um, I can remember an incident where part of my message for someone should have been that they were going to lose someone who was close to them in the coming year. But I didn't, I was young at that time, and I didn't feel comfortable giving that message. Looking back, I think it would have been upsetting to them, but might have prepared them for what did in fact happen. and that Spirit did not give it to me for no reason. But I was not at that point in my career yet that I felt comfortable with such a message. And that's up to you as a reader. It's up to you in bringing through messages. Um, if you think a message is one that you cannot comfortably give, then perhaps you should not give it. That's up to you. I tend to believe that you get the message for a reason, but you must also consider how you give it to the people. Um, Speaking of that, every now and then you'll see a situation where someone will go up to a stranger and say, "Oh, I've gotten a psychic message for you." In my experience, that does not normally happen. Um, Certainly does not happen online. If you get a situation where someone claiming to be a psychic or, quote, spiritual worker, end quote, sends you a message saying that they have an unsolicited message for you, that is a troll. Ignore them. That is a person who um, is not moving forward from a good place. Um, I'm not going to say that there's never a chance it could be something else, because um, I have seen people get messages for strangers and wonder if they should go up to them and give it to them. Um, but generally speaking, a professional psychic is not going to do that unless for some reason it's very pressing, and if they do feel the need to do it, um, it's a very unusual thing. And most professional psychics I know wouldn't even be getting that kind of message in the first place. Be very careful about people trying to do that to you. What they're really trying to do is get a reading, and probably not going to give you a legitimate one. One of the problems with psychic work and divination is that there are still lots of people who abuse the field. Lots of people who basically are scam artists. I'll never forget the Tomato Lady of Elgin. Um, and she was one of a class of psychics who invariably found that her clients had a curse put on them that she could remove in return for X hundreds or thousands of dollars, that she would take to the graveyard and burn, but nobody could see her do it because that would ruin the spell. Yet there is nothing like that in actual magic. That is not how it works. If someone tells you that you have a curse on you that they can conveniently remove for a large sum of money, um, particularly if it's not something that you have any awareness of, yeah, that's a scam. Now, if you feel you're having trouble with something and you go to someone for help, I'm not saying that they're helping you as a scam, but it wouldn't be like that. It wouldn't be some outrageous sum of money, and it wouldn't be taken to be burned in in the graveyard at midnight. Um, they might do energy work, they might do a ritual, etc., and they would do it for a reasonable price. If something seems like it's too much, it probably is. Um, there are people who take advantage of people's fears. This is one of the reasons I try not to be, as I like to put it, oogie boogie about things, and why I tend to be suspicious of people who are, because they're often using it to frighten people in order to get them to do things like that. And I don't think there's ever an occasion that you should need to do something like that. Now, like I say, there may be times when you may need energetic cleansing or spiritual protection or what have you, but it's not going to be a ridiculous price for a mysterious ritual. Um, I would expect that generally it would be comparable to whatever else the person does. Now, I will say that this may vary in different traditions, but if that's the case, you'll see it within that tradition. So, for example, in African traditional religion, I think there's a very different attitude toward pricing of things than you might find in a lot of Western paganism. But that's traditional to the movement, and it's nothing unusual. It's not something one person does. Um, and generally speaking, my advice to you is that you should use your common sense both in what you're pursuing and what you're receiving, and you'll be happier for it. Now, having said that, of course, if someone's better known, they're likely to be more expensive. Um, that's going to be true in any profession. If someone is just beginning, I would expect them to probably be less expensive. If someone's been there for 40 years, I would expect that to be reflected in the price, but it's not going to generally be ridiculous. It will be commensurate to their level of experience and to some extent their level of fame. And, if it's too much, there are lots of other people, lots of other psychics in the sea, so to speak. Um, but I think my message for today is always use your common sense, whether in bringing through messages or in receiving them or in choosing someone to work with. And, you want to pay attention to your inner feelings. If you have a good feeling for that person, you probably should listen to it. If you have a bad feeling, you should listen to that, even if it's different from other people's feelings, because your connection to that person may not be the same as other people's. One of the things that makes a difference in whether a psychic has a good or a bad day is the individual connection between the psychic and the client. And that's not universally going to be the same. It can vary from one situation to another. And that has to do with all kinds of different variables. So, everyone else may swear by a particular psychic. You go and you have a bad experience. Doesn't mean it's a bad psychic. It just means it was not a particularly good connection for you, or maybe not a good day for them. By the same token, everybody else has a bad experience. You may find you love the person. Um, and I've found in my own experience that there have been people that I can be far more precise with than other people, just because of we obviously had a closer connection. This will happen. In the end, it's a very individual situation. That's why it's an art, not a science. Um, all kinds of different things will influence it. So, those are my thoughts for today. I hope you find them interesting, and it's time for a word from our sponsors. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next auction will be Saturday evening at 7 Central. I hope you'll join us for that. And I hope that the rest of your day is lovely, and we'll be back tomorrow. And now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we rejoice in this walk we walk together. And we ask you to help us to bring through the messages of Spirit when they come to us, and to receive these, and also to apply them in practical ways in our lives, and to be able to accurately assess them according to how they will best help us. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, and knowing you are always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and we'll see you again tomorrow.